This past November, my friend Steven and I went hiking in Big Bend National Park. I brought my Hasselblad to shoot some medium format film, and Steven's an ecologist, so we made a lot of stops along the way to touch plants and take pictures. I also had my FM3A with me for 35mm and a baby Bolex to shoot some 8mm film because I thought it would be fun. I shot both black and white and color film, and I did a comparison between color slide and color negative film, which I found really interesting. We flew into El Paso and stayed the first night there to organize ourselves for a few days of backpacking and left early the next morning to drive 4 hours to the park. Now I'll stop talking for a bit so you can enjoy some beautiful hiking and picture making. Because of the drive, we only had about a third of a day to hike, but our campsite was only 3 miles from the visitor center, so we set up camp and then hiked a mile further to the Toll Mountain lookout for sunset. Unfortunately, one of my film backs seems to have a light leak and needs the seals replaced, as you can see in this one. It looks kind of like a laser beam on this image, but maybe I'm just trying to convince myself that it still looks cool. At least it wasn't on every frame. I don't shoot as much color compared to black and white, but the sunset that evening was out of this world, so I was glad that I brought some color film. There are a few color negative landscapes I've taken that I like, but based on my workflow, meaning how I expose, develop, process, and edit my pictures, I've tended to like more of my photos on slide film than those on color negative. I wanted to do a one-to-one comparison between color positive or slide film and color negative for landscape pictures. The one color negative image that comes to mind was taken in the middle of the day, so maybe that's part of it too. This evening I shot one roll of Kodak Ektachrome and one roll of Kodak Portra 160. I rated both of them at 100 because I've always preferred my Portra 160 slightly overexposed, and this was meant to be a real-world test of how I would actually shoot these films. I do prefer the color and saturation of the Ektachrome slide film pictures, but definitely the ones that were exposed exactly perfect. Slide film hates overexposure. As you can see in these next few, the Ektachrome quickly loses a lot of detail and contrast, while the Portra seems to thrive. It's tough shooting these two kinds of film side by side because of how differently they react to light. Even though I prefer more of the slide film images, I loved the result that I was able to get with this overexposed portrait shot so much that I made it the thumbnail for this video. The light at this time of day is so fleeting. This is a 4-minute clip sped up by about 20 times, and you can see how fast it's changing. The next morning we woke up before dawn. Our goal was to climb 1,500 feet over 2.5 miles to see the sunrise from the highest point in the park at Emory Peak, which is just under 8,000 feet. Again, the colors were crazy, so I continued my comparison, and this time with a roll of Fuji Velvia 50 and Fuji Pro 160 NS. I metered the Velvia at box speed 50 ISO and the Pro 160 NS at 100, which is similar to the Portra and has always given me better results. My film back definitely needs to be serviced because the first two frames of the roll of Velvia were slightly overlapping, so I was actually glad to have two sets of images. The rest of that roll was evenly spaced though, which was good. This shot is an example of how the two different kinds of film handle extreme highlights. Negative film is known for having much wider dynamic range, but you can see that the sun itself is still completely blown out. On the slide film, however, the overexposure bleeds into the surrounding frame, while it's much more contained on the negative film. I still like the slide film image better though because the highlight balances the jet black foreground and you can still see the layers all the way across the horizon. Fuji's films have always been my favorite for color personally. It sucks that most of their film is discontinued now because I've found that for my workflow, the way that they formulate the relationships between colors is more my preference compared to Kodak. I know color negative is super flexible and I can replicate the look I get with Fujifilm color negatives fairly closely with Kodak, but Fuji's has always been easier for me to edit for the results that I like, so I'm hoarding the last of my rolls in the freezer for special occasions like the Dolomites this coming summer. On the way down, we encountered a black bear in the middle of the trail digging for an agave root. We made noise and waved our arms, but he couldn't seem to be bothered for like 15 minutes.
What do you smell? Not us, probably.
Eventually, he gave way and let us pass. We hiked down towards the east rim through some canyons filled with little pockets of fall color, and it was really cool to be in such close contrast to the desert cacti. Unfortunately, the sun was high and bright with no clouds and quite a bit of haze, so it wasn't the best light for taking pictures. But I put a red 25 filter on my lens and then even a polarizing filter on top of that, which helped a little bit, but it's still not my favorite. I'm already planning for the next time to come back here and camp for a night or two on the south rim itself so that I can get these vistas bathed in beautiful soft shades of color. Way out over the mountain. Like that, yep, perfect. Got it. Completing a big 20-mile loop, we hiked back down towards the visitor center to refill on water since there were no natural sources, before heading back out a couple of miles to our campsite. And what a campsite. We had beautiful views of the sunset. The next morning, our plan was to hike down to the window and then hit the hot springs before heading out. I wasn't thinking straight or something, but I missed the most incredible moonset that I've ever seen, which you can just barely see in this one. It just dipped those last perfect inches on the horizon so freaking quickly. Another thing to come back for. The window is a V-shaped lookout with an expansive cliff at its crux, and the hike down to it is really nice and green because when it does rain, the water runs down through it. Next, it was off to some natural hot springs on the Rio Grande. At the beginning of the 20th century, there was a small and remote health spa here centered around the hot springs. None of that is here now except the old foundation where the hot springs are and a couple of old buildings. Biggest mistake of the trip was to leave our cash in the car because right across the Rio Grande in Mexico, a family was selling fresh tamales, and those would have been perfect while alternating between the warm hot spring pools and the cool river water. Another thing to add to the list for next time. From there we headed out to Marfa, which is an interesting little town halfway between Big Bend and El Paso, which is known for attracting artists, and we walked around, we ate, we drank, and spent the night. We happened upon a store called Cactus Liquors, and wanting to admire their collection of tequila, we popped in, but they were really nice and ended up getting us kind of drunk on samples, and I bought a too nice bottle of mezcal, which made me feel like I got a little bamboozled the next morning, but then I remembered I still had a very nice bottle of mezcal, so maybe it was a win-win. On the way out the next morning, we stopped at Prada Marfa to take some pictures before heading to El Paso to fly out. We ended up getting the best tamales that I've ever had on the way back to the airport, which we finished in the parking lot at the rental car return along with the rest of our tequila before boarding our flights to head home. At home, I developed all the film over about a week or so. Pulling slide film out of the development tank is always so cool. That's all I've got for this one. If you made it this far, let me know in the comments down below, and thank you so much for watching. As always, shoot more film.